The desert exhaled softly beneath a dying sun, and the wind carried the scent of sage and smoke through the still air. The light stretched long across the prairie, gilding the dust, the fences, the tired bones of a land that had learned to endure silence. Elias Boone, age 30, stood by the corral, his broad shoulders catching the last of the amber glow. He was a man built from quiet hours, from the ache of solitude, from hands that spoke more than his tongue ever could. His horses shifted lazily, their breath rising like ghosts. He listened to the wind and felt that strange tremor again, the one that made him think the world was trying to tell him something he had forgotten. Then, faintly, through the hum of cicadas, came a sound that didn't belong. A whisper, a hum, a breath too human to be the wind. He turned toward the barn. The boards creaked like old bones as he pushed the door open. Inside, moonlight poured through the cracks, spilling over the hay in trembling lines. His gaze fell on her, Iona Redbird, age 20, asleep beside his horse like a dream misplaced. Her hair was dark as wet earth, her face soft beneath the pale wash of light. The faint rise and fall of her chest seemed to slow time itself. For a moment Elias stood still, his heart thudding like hooves far off on the plains. He knew that face. He had seen her once, by the river weeks ago, when she had laughed beneath the rain, unafraid of thunder. He hadn't known her name then, only the echo of her joy. Now, here she was, sleeping in his barn as if the world had led her back to him. He knelt down, careful not to startle her. Her hand twitched in her sleep, a small, childlike motion that made something ache deep within him. From now on, he whispered, the words trembling out before he could stop them, "You're mine." But as soon as they left his lips, he knew he didn't mean possession. He meant he belonged to this moment, to her peace, to her presence. And still, the whisper hung there, like a promise neither could hear nor understand. Morning came slowly, sunlight sneaking through the barn slats in thin golden blades. The scent of hay and coffee mingled with the hum of waking life. Iona stirred, her eyes opening to meet a man standing in the doorway, tall, broad, framed by light. Elias Boone looked like a mountain wearing a hat, every line of him carved by work and time. "You're safe," he said softly. His voice was deep but careful, as if he feared it might frighten her. Iona sat up, brushing straw from her skirt. Her eyes were quick, curious, unafraid. "This your barn?" she asked. "Mine," he said. "And the horses? You must have been tired to wander in." She smiled faintly, then looked around, noticing how everything here spoke of solitude: the worn saddle by the wall, the boots by the door, the table with a single cup. "You live here alone?" she asked. He nodded once. "Just me and the quiet." She watched him as he poured coffee into a tin cup, the movement slow, deliberate. "I was traveling," she said, "to see what lay beyond my tribe's borders. The night came fast, and I saw your light. I didn't mean to intrude." Elias offered her the cup. "You can stay until you find your way again." Iona took it, feeling the warmth in her hands. There was something about his stillness that drew her in, a man shaped by silence but not hardened by it. She wondered what kind of pain had carved such gentleness into someone so large. She wanted to ask, but instead she said, "Do you ever think about what's beyond these hills?" He looked out the door toward the horizon. "Used to," he said. "Then I figured the world had already passed me by." Her eyes softened. "Maybe it hasn't. Maybe it's just waiting." The words lingered between them, fragile as morning mist. They spent the day tending the horses together. Iona moved with grace, talking to the animals in her own language, her laughter bright against the still air. Elias watched her from the corner of his eye, feeling both awe and unease. The way she smiled made the world seem less hollow. Yet each glance at her reminded him of distance. She belonged to the open world, to stories and songs, not to a lonely cowboy and his quiet barn. By dusk, they sat outside near the fence, the sky painted in bruised purples. Iona spoke of her tribe, of her father Chief Red Elk, a man proud and bound to tradition. "He doesn't understand why I want to see what's beyond our lands," she said. "He says the wind out there carries sorrow." Elias chuckled softly. "He's not wrong." She smiled. "Maybe. But sorrow teaches, doesn't it?" He nodded, staring at the last streaks of sun. "Sometimes it's the only teacher." A pause. The air grew tender between them, the kind that made both hearts hesitate. He wanted to ask her to stay. She wanted him to tell her she could. But neither did. And when the night deepened, the silence felt heavier than words. Then came the sound, distant hooves, many of them. Ayanna stiffened. The color drained from her face. "My people," she whispered. The thunder grew closer until the ground itself seemed to tremble. Elias rose, his expression unreadable. Soon, figures emerged from the dark, torches flickering against painted faces and proud eyes. At their head rode Chief Red Elk, tall, stern, his presence commanding the night. "Daughter," the chief called, his voice cutting through the wind. "You should not be here." Ayanna stepped forward, her chin high. "Father, I was only resting." "The storm." He raised a hand. "You belong with your people." Elias took a step back, bowing his head slightly. "She meant no harm," he said. The chief's eyes turned to him, sharp as flint. "And yet harm finds those who forget boundaries." The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Finally, the chief turned his horse. "Come, Ayanna." She hesitated, looking at Elias. He said nothing, only held her gaze as if memorizing it. And then, with a small nod, she mounted her horse and rode away into the darkness. The sound of their departure faded like a dying heartbeat, leaving only the restless whisper of the wind behind. Days passed, then weeks. The barn felt emptier than before. Elias worked, ate, slept, but everything seemed quieter, as though the land itself had lost its color. Sometimes, at night, he would sit by the river and watch the moon ripple on the surface, half expecting to hear her laughter. And one evening, when the sky was low and the air smelled of rain, he did. She stood across the water, her figure half shadowed by the mist. "You shouldn't be here," he said, though his voice betrayed relief. "I had to see you," Ayanna replied. "They watch me always, but I find ways." They met in secret after that, always by the river. Sometimes they spoke of small things, the weather, the horses, the stories they remembered from childhood. Sometimes they said nothing at all. Their connection grew not through words but through gestures, the way he would drape his coat over her shoulders when the air cooled, or how she would braid a feather into his hatband, smiling softly without reason. One night, as lightning stitched the sky, Ayanna said, "If my father learns of this, he'll make you prove yourself." Elias met her gaze. "Then I'll prove it." The storm broke above them, and rain fell like a curtain between two worlds. They stood beneath it, unflinching, their hands nearly touching but not yet brave enough to close the space. When the chief discovered their meetings, the sky itself seemed to darken. He called for Elias to face a challenge, a test of spirit, not strength. "Spend a night in the canyon," the chief declared, "where the spirits of the old ones dwell. Survive until dawn, and the ancestors will decide your worth." Elias accepted without a word. That night, the canyon was an ocean of shadow. The wind howled through the rocks, whispering old griefs. He sat by a dying fire and thought of Ayanna, her laughter, her fierce will, the way her eyes had changed the shape of his silence. When the cold bit deep, he closed his eyes and spoke to the stars. "If I am to be judged," he murmured, "let it be by love, not fear." When dawn finally came, the tribe found him still standing, his coat torn, his face streaked with dust, but his eyes bright and unbroken. The chief looked at him for a long time, then nodded once. "The spirits favor you," he said. "Take her then, if she still wishes it." That night the drums beat through the valley. The air shimmered with song and smoke. Ayanna walked to Elias beneath a canopy of silver moonlight, her dress glimmering with beads and feathers. When she reached him, she smiled the way morning breaks across water. They stood before the tribe, hands joined, hearts steady. And as the music swelled, Elias lifted her into his arms, carrying her to the riverbank where their story had first begun. The moon hung low, casting their reflections into the trembling current. They danced slowly, without words, the world holding its breath around them. "You were never mine," Elias whispered at last, voice rough with tenderness. "You were the world's." Ayanna rested her forehead against his. "Then the world is kind," she said. He smiled, and for the first time in his life, the quiet didn't feel lonely. The river sang softly, and the stars listened. The night folded around them like a promise fulfilled. And if you were to walk by that river now, you might still hear the faint echo of their laughter carried by the wind, reminding you that love, when true, does not bind. It frees. For every heart that dares to wander finds, somewhere beyond the horizon, a home it never expected to deserve.